Well, greetings. This is Dr. Dean Blevins, the Kansas City First Church discipleship pastor. Welcome you back to an ongoing study that we're doing, sort of following the life of Jesus, but doing that primarily through our understanding of the disciples and sort of finding our own journey in the lives of each of these disciples. Now, this time, before I sort of describe our two disciples, I wanted to start with a kind of thought experiment. One I hope that you'll find helpful as we get going. So let me just ask a question. When you were growing up, did you ever have a relative, say a distant relative, that you just had trouble remembering their name? Now, just to be frank with you, I grew up in the southeastern part of the United States, so I'm a true Southerner, as they'd said. And I was part of a big Southern family where I didn't have brothers and sisters, but I had a lot of cousins and second cousins and third cousins and people married to those third cousins. And in the Southeast, there are a lot of pretty common names, sometimes hyphenated, like Billy Bob or Emma Sue, but just a lot of, well, just Billies in some places, or Jims, and a lot of Sues, and in my family, some kind of unique names, but even regardless, it was just hard sometimes to keep everybody straight. And in a way, that's where is a good way to introduce our disciples this time, since we're going to be talking about two rather obscure disciples that go by the name of James the Lesser, and the other one by the name of Judas, or is it Thaddeus, or is it Jude, or is it Lebbaeus? Well, we'll try to sort that out before the presentation is over. But let's start with the one that seems to be a little bit easier, and that's James the Lesser. Now, to be honest with you, we don't know a whole lot about James the Lesser. We do know that he is the son of Alphaeus, that we know his mother's name was Mary. We get that in Mark chapter 15. But that he also had a brother named Joseph in Matthew 27. And oh, by the way, his mother Mary was not Mary, the mother of Jesus, but this was a cousin of that Mary by the name of Mary. And so this is one way to think of this. This is James, the son of Mary, who is the cousin of Mary, who is the mother of Jesus. Confused already? Well, you can imagine how many times the disciples must have felt trying to keep track. Also, the fact that Jesus actually did have a brother by the name of James, who we know then later was a leader in the New Testament church. That might be the reason why this particular James is known as James the Lesser, or what we call sometimes Little James, as I probably would use in the South before it's all said and done. Is that what is important to remember is that although James is somewhat in the background, he was chosen by Jesus, and he was one of the 12. As a matter of fact, he became one of the 12 apostles, and we know that he was valued as an apostle, as an evangelist. And the tradition says that he was also a martyr, that he was crucified, mind you, in Sinai, or possibly stoned to death in Jerusalem, one or the other. We're not quite sure in the obscurity of his death. There are competing sort of histories there. But that James the Less, or Little James, was nevertheless both a disciple and apostle, and one who actually suffered a martyr's death before it was all said and done. Well, what about Judas? Well, this is not that Judas Iscariot, Judas the traitor. This is the other Judas that was a part of the family of disciples during this period of time. And it's probably the fact that he carried the same name as Judas the traitor that it was shortened in some of the Gospels to Jude, just to sort of distinguish Judas the traitor from Judas/Jude, the other disciple. By the way, though, we do know with the name Jude that he was also the writer of the epistle Jude that we find in the New Testament. But there are other places where he doesn't even go by that name at all. He is really Judas Thaddeus, sort of having a surname much like Judas Iscariot. And to really separate the two, to make absolute certain, they would call him Thaddeus, and oh, by the way, who had the surname Lebbaeus. And so Thaddeus Lebbaeus would be one way to think of it, almost like Billy Bob. So confused yet? So this is Judas, who is also Jude, who also is known as Judas Thaddeus or Thaddeus Lebbaeus. Much like, well, this is my brother Billy Bob, who is brother to Bob, who is son to Billy. Well, for all of that confusion, we do know that actually he does have a role in the Gospels. As a matter of fact, he shows up in John 14, chapter 22, and like many of the other disciples, he is sort of struggling with what Jesus' intent is. As a matter of fact, he looks at Jesus and says, Lord, why are you going to reveal yourself only to us and not to the world at large? And so this is someone who is passionate about getting Jesus's message out and letting people know who the true Messiah is. To which, well, Christ responds that Christ will reveal himself to all who love Jesus, which, by the way, was also this Judas/Jude. By the way, that he is also, early traditions see him as actually, after Pentecost, taking the gospel north of Jerusalem and Israel to Edessa, and there healing the king of Edessa. And Eusebius, the historian, said that the archives at Edessa contained the visit of Judas and the healing of Aguilar, but those archives have now been since destroyed, and that he also died a martyr's death, probably, sadly, being clubbed to death because of his faith. An image that might forebode another conversation. So what we have are two rather obscure disciples, both James the Lesser, little James, as I tend to think of him, and also, well, Jude/Judas, Thaddeus Lebbaeus, who is also to be distinguished from the bit more bigger, well-known character of Judas the traitor, or Judas Iscariot. But what do these two disciples have to teach us? Well, I think the most important thing is, though we don't have lots of information about them, though they don't sort of live large in the Gospels, much like Peter, as we talked about, or John, that don't even have the same kind of reputation of someone like Matthew in later times. Nevertheless, they are disciples who become apostles, leaders of the church, who become evangelists, who actually even suffer a martyr's death. And that gives pause to me. I don't know about you. When I think about my own life, I mean, is it that I need to have my life lived out large? We've talked about this before. And that is really important for sort of Jesus to recognize me and who I am and all the things I've been doing. Is that important? Or is it just enough to be named among the other disciples and to be seen as part of those disciples in the ministry that they did? As a matter of fact, as we think about our own lives and where we are in our journey, are we content just to be ranked with those who love Jesus? Remember what Jesus said actually to Thaddeus. You know, those that love me will know me. And would we at least be satisfied with that fact? That the fact that we know Jesus, the fact that we are a part of Jesus's life in the way in which he is lived out through the body of Christ, the church today, the fact that we know him, would that be enough just to be named that way? You know, it might even be special to see our name written, if you will, in the Bible, though there are imagery later in Revelations where we talk about having our names written in the book of life. There are parables that Jesus uses where Jesus would just say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And wouldn't it be just enough in our own lives just to know that our names, whether the name is very unique or very common, whether it's well known inside the family or one of those distant relatives, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because our name is on Jesus's lips. Wouldn't that be important enough? Well, I hope this gives you something to think about and reflect upon. Blessings to you, and we'll see you again.